My name is Mike Dart.
And I am Richard Wagoner.
We're back.
Do exactly as we say and no one gets hurt.
This is it. Another edition of Radio Waves. My name is Mike Stark.
And Richard Wagoner.
And joining us, as always, he's almost a regular co-host, actually, at this point. Dave Beasing is with us. How are you, Dave?
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
No, it's a good thing.
That.
Well, as we've said before, you're the only guy that really knows about radio. The other two of us are just, we're just fans. So,
well, we're all faking it. Let's admit it.
And honestly, no one else is returning calls. So
yeah, that's right.
That.
Yeah. Because they've all left the business is what has happened. So. All right, we got 3 columns to cover today. We're going to go back to September 8th and the fall of Top 40, Richard?
Yeah, which happens occasionally. I don't know if you remember the 80s before KISS FM became big. It was kind of considered dead at the time, too. But I was just kind of surprised going through the ratings and noticing how far down KISS has gone. And I definitely did not mean this to be a KISS FM bash fest, because I didn't mean it that way. But they were tied for 8th place with a 3.7 back in the summertime, July Nielsen's. And it got me thinking about some things. And we also had a Sean Ross column from RadioInsight.com who was talking about Top 40 that he remembers and a few things like that. So it kind of came down to what's wrong with Top 40 and what's going on with it and what'll bring it back. So kind of a couple things came out of the discussion, and the response from readers has been the same. We are having some stations that are going further back and kind of playing more oldies. That did work for one station and kind of sparked it. I think Dave talked about it at one time. I'm not positive, but it was one of those stations that just was kind of had nothing to lose and started adding a few more golds to the format, and it helped for them. So there was an article about other stations doing it. What they're finding now is it's not really helping. I don't know if it's hurting, but it's not really helping. So one of the things Sean Ross talked about is, whatever happened to Top 40? Top 40 used to be the best of all formats. You could hear country, you could hear gold, you could hear urban, you could hear whatever. And you're kind of not hearing that now. And his idea is, hey, let's kind of go back to that.
Any insight, Dave, that you can add to this?
I guess what you're saying is make it more relevant to everything that's happening today and not be as narrow. And that makes some sense. But the problem, of course, is it's a whole nother podcast, that the younger demos today are certainly exposed to older music in addition to new music, because they're in the backseat of my car singing songs from my generation, and a little bit pissed that I know the lyrics too. Because they discover this stuff online or on TikTok, or they trade it with each other, or it's the soundtrack to a big show on Netflix, or whatever. And so there's definitely that. And I guess if you're relevant, it would include some of that. It would include some things from lots of different musical genres. If you're uber relevant and timely and in the moment, but that's difficult to do on a medium that is not timely and in the moment. You're not the hot medium that they care about. And so that in and of itself creates a problem for Top 40 or CHR radio. There's been a lot of discussion about how TikTok, because it's driven by algorithms and what people are actually viewing, driving tastes in music or selling products, causing my kids to come up with some crazy recipe they want to make or whatever. Musically, Alt was doing this. No, it wasn't Alt. It was K-Rock was doing this some in the, and maybe it was Alt before that too. But Mike Kaplan was a big believer in this, who was the program director, Mike the Show Killer, as Woody would refer to him. Mike was really chasing the TikTok musically speaking. At K-Rock for a while, and at Alt before that. I think that though radio has looked to TikTok to see what music is timely and relevant, and maybe there's something to that. I don't know. I think more timely and relevant might be, or a better tip to get from TikTok would be the between the records.
Right.
We're locked in. KISS and other stations are locked into, okay, JoJo's in the afternoon, and there's this here, and then we got a sweeper that sounds like this, and it ends in call letters, and you get it. Come on. That's not how TikTok works. That's not how the younger audience consumes media. Maybe there's some ways to freshen up radio by changing things up that way. Okay, off the soapbox.
It's interesting you mentioned that, and it suddenly came to mind when Craig Carpenter was programming the mix, the old KZY, and his night guy did that. And the whole station kind of had that attitude. You never knew what they were going to do. And I always thought that, was it Clear Channel at the time or the predecessor? I always thought they were dumb for killing off that format. They should have put it on one of their other stations, even if they had to sell that off for the limits at the time.
Yeah, I think the bottom line comes down to what we've talked about numerous times: is everybody wants to play it safe.
Yeah,
they want to play it safe, and
safe isn't what's happening though.
Yeah, and the safe is the demise of what the medium we love. So.
And it is true that, in their defense, I guess, PPM, the electronic ratings methodology that Nielsen uses now, it does tend to push people towards safe, because familiar is definitely something that PPM likes.
Yep.
People will hit those buttons looking for what they like, and they don't know what they like. They just like what they know.
It's a shame a former really good programmer or someone in radio. I'm not specifically looking at you, because I know you wouldn't want to do this, but it's a shame that someone who is kind of pushed out of radio but knows radio couldn't come up with a better rating system, because PPM sounded great. It's one of those things, sounds great on paper. In action, it's not.
Yeah, just isn't a big enough sample there. And that's a whole nother podcast too.
Changes at K Mozart?
That isn't actually a change, but Saul Levine sent out kind of a cryptic message saying that he's ready to test all digital AM. And I'm hoping he does. I hope that I'm part of the testing.
And use K Mozart as a...
Yeah, because 1260 is the one that does it. So not really a change, but I thought he could, he was talking about doing it for an hour at a time in various parts. Says, why don't you do it overnight? Let's see how far it travels.
Now, remind us, do we need a special receiver to do that?
HD.
Oh, you need the HD radio.
Yeah.
Okay.
Regular would just hear static.
That brings us to the September 15th column, where you start out talking about digital TV changes, but that will affect some radio changes. Tell us about this.
It's very similar, if you really analyze it, very similar to when FM first came on, or actually not the first time it came on when they were in the old frequencies, but when they moved the frequencies to 88 to 108, sandwiched between Channel 6 and Channel 7 on TV. What they're talking about here is with the new ATSC3, they could fit a ton of digital channels in one station that would occupy digitally for TV. So one of the proposals is to have one or two, depending on the size of the market, channels dedicated to radio.
And you need a special receiver for that?
Yeah, another receiver.
Yeah.
Might as well keep adding to the mix.
Yeah, right. And then you have some suggestions to your listeners or your readers about getting better reception?
Mainly just getting better antennas. Some of the areas, people were saying they're having trouble receiving radios or certain stations. And if it's AM, it's probably local interference that's causing the problem, and you just can move the radio or try to get an antenna on there. Radio Shack used to sell this really cool antenna thing that had a tunable dial on it, and you just had to put it near the radio to get better reception. It actually made it sound pretty good, although it did take away some of the bandwidth behind it. But for FM, I just get really good results whenever I have a house antenna, and I think if you're at home, it's worth the time of putting up a house antenna, just like the old days of TV.
No, I'll use my app, thanks.
Yeah, that's probably this is easy. Smart speakers are killing off. I do wonder when the time will come that the cost of electricity and land will be the thing that really kills off radio, and everyone goes to apps.
Yeah, because it takes up a lot of space to have an antenna and all that.
Right.
You could put a CVS on that property.
Right.
Because the world needs more CVSs and Rite Aids.
September 21st column, which is this week, as we're doing this, you do a little piece on KFI.
Yeah, KFI's back up to number 3. And the reason I wanted to mention it is besides trying to hype up stations that are climbing in the ratings, and especially on AM, partly as kind of a bash to KNX FM, since they're still not doing better than they did with separate signals. But with KFI, a lot of it had to do with the fact that I kept getting people writing to me saying, "Can't you write about KFI? They're doing so terribly. Those changes they made last January, putting Mo Kelly in the evening. Do you even listen? It's terrible. It's terrible. And the ratings are way down." So I checked, and they're not. They weren't down. They might have gone down a tiny bit, but as a whole for the year, they weren't really down anyway. And then this is a pretty big jump. So they're now at their highest rating they've been in about 2 years, I think.
That's great. And this is why Tim Conway Jr. refers to Richard as King Richard. He writes nice things about.
Oh, nice.
So funny.
Well, that move certainly panned out. I loved in your column the quotes from Robin Bertolucci, especially the part that, stating the obvious, I guess. It's always been her philosophy, and others before her, like David G. Hall back in the day, having people feel informed and entertained. And the "and entertained" part gets lost on so many stations that try to do talk radio.
Yeah.
And on podcasts too. Podcasts that come off like watching a C-SPAN are it may be very informative, but they're not going to get listeners.
Right, exactly.
So in the end, is it really that informative if only 2 people are listening and they already think the way that you're talking?
Yeah. The other thing, Richard, that if I may, I will call out and give a high five, congratulations to, is K-Earth. Their 6 ratings book at number 1, 6 plus. Number 1, 2554 for the 7th straight survey. Number 1, 1834 for the 4th straight survey. And here you go back to your conversation about older music. Yep. Number 1, 18 to 34, K-Earth.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it definitely is. So congratulations to them. And I noticed from a Facebook post, I guess it's true, that they have changed their logo lately to look like a California vintage license plate.
Right.
K-Earth 101 across there, and LAOC in the 2 corners, upper left and right of the plate. And I love that. I just, it certainly captures the spirit, the feel, the fun of the station, of the brand. But also, I just love that somebody is doing something visually with radio other than stacked letters as a logo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course, you know they used their entire promotion budget to redo that
license plate.
That license plate's logo.
Do you think they were inspired by K West when they were AOR, since they kind of did the same thing?
I think they don't remember what a K West is.
Yeah, probably too young.
Yeah.
I still laugh, and K-Earth at one time, of course, played music from the 50s and 60s, and people think, that's what oldies are. That was in 1972. The music was like 15 years old.
Yeah. But, talking about contemporizing the sound of a station, that's what Chris Ebbett did.
Yeah.
From the moment he took over. He didn't jerk it that direction, but he moved it very steadily that direction, not only musically, and he didn't have a lot of research to base that on at the time. They weren't buying him research, probably still aren't buying him much. But he moved it musically. But he also probably took a lot of criticism from the old guard that he did away with the Pam's jingles, with the big voice over timpani, kind of top of the hour sort of a thing. No knock on any of those folks, but that was a dated sound, and he really brought it into the future, or the present, let's say.
And people forget that those jingles actually came out way into their life. I mean, I know that the sound was the same as far as the notes that were used, but the original KF jingles were not what they started using in the 80s.
Oh, really? Were they not knockoffs of the old KHJ jingles?
They were knockoffs, but they were modernized knockoffs.
Right.
So when they went back to the ones that they started using about 86, Mike? 84, maybe? I don't remember. They were actually clones of the old KHJ jingles.
Oh, okay.
And I'm always the type that I like what I grew up with, so I always like the original jingles anyway. And then me being so stupid, never noticed that they were actually knockoffs of the KHJ jingles.
Right. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. And finally, we talked about Don Barrett a few weeks ago and his health crisis. Well, he's left us. And we're going to miss Don. He huge outpouring from the radio community when he did pass, and you sort of covered that very well, as always. To me, it's sort of symbolic of the medium that we lost Don to some degree, because Don was LA radio without a doubt, and LA radio isn't what it used to be. So.
And if you have not heard the interview, I'm talking to listeners now. If you have not heard the interview that Mike did with him, you have to go listen. Mike, that was amazing. I noticed in listening to it, though, that he lied. He said, "Oh, I'll come back anytime."
Yeah, no, he wouldn't. He wouldn't come
Never
back
did
anytime. Another
interview in his life.
Yeah, I don't think he did. He did a couple little interviews that I heard that people posted, but they weren't as massive as I got out of him. And I'm really proud of that interview, actually, because we covered a lot of ground of LA radio and played air checks, and it was a fun interview. I listened to it again. I hadn't listened to it in a long time. I listened to it again, and I'm pretty proud of that, actually.
You should be.
Yeah.
You definitely should be, Mike. It's a great interview, and I love that whole idea of capturing that knowledge from someone like that, because it's a shame that Don is no longer with us in present time, but those memories, those stories needed to be captured, and we should all do that with the people in our lives who are getting older, or before they get older, because you never know which bus has your name on it. Yep. But, we need to let the personal, real life history of our culture not pass away when we lose somebody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in terms of moving on, Dave recently went to another podcast convention, which you had.
That's what it was called. Another podcast convention. It was.
Which one was it? I mean, you go to one. It seems like one every month, but this was this in Vegas? I don't remember where it was.
Yeah, I go about twice a year. Podcast Movement. They have their big show in August each year. This one was in Denver, or more accurately, Aurora, Colorado, out by the airport. And it was, I think, the best attended that they'd had in a while. Looks like they were coming out of, COVID is over, and the new strain hadn't arrived quite yet. So it was well attended. And I'd say that there were many takeaways for people who attended, but probably the biggest item of conversation was video versus audio only, and the changing definitions of the word podcast.
Right.
That was the subject of a big research project that was unveiled from Coleman Insights, and Amplify Media partnered on that. And if you go to either website, Coleman or Amplify with an I at the end, you'll find replays of their online webinar version of that presentation. Very interesting. And I think that one of the an anecdote that I heard that wasn't part of their presentation. They've got all the data, but a great anecdote that illustrates their data was just a conversation that I had with somebody from SiriusXM, actually, who said, you know, I think he said he has an 18-year-old son who's headed to college this fall, and he asked his kid, what podcasts are you into these days? And so his son named 3 or 4 podcasts, and his son had some friends over back by the pool. So he opens the back door from the kitchen and says, guys, hey, what podcasts are you watching now? With that generation, not that he represents everybody, but increasingly with that generation, the visual has been something that they grew up with all of their media. Yeah. And my daughter, as a prime example, she is 7th grader. She walks around, and I suppose there are those listening who would think I'm a terrible parent for acquiescing to this. She walks around with her phone playing video for her all the time.
No, it's not rare at all. My grandkids are that
room. It's how she exits a room, and until we tell her that it's time to have dinner and have a real conversation or something, it's going to be on. And she is often listening to it. I mean, I've noticed we used to do homework with music on or radio, playing music, entertaining us in the background. And we didn't consider that to be a distraction as we did our homework or even studying something kind of intense. Right. But she's that way with video. I'll see, and she's a straight A student. She's sitting there doing her homework with some video playing something. And she's really kind of half listening. The video is secondary, but there's always something that she can glance at. And so podcasters are learning that as part of the future, it may be stationary images. Right. Not a full-on video isn't right for every podcast. I mean, look at this one. I mean, we should be heard and not seen. Correct. But being able to glance at us and realize that, and then turn away is an expectation that I think exists from here on out. And I watched the webinar that you spoke about, and the data plays out as well that more and more people are going to YouTube to get their podcasts. Yeah. And the data was pretty clear about that. In fact, that people are using YouTube, and YouTube is also stepping up and focusing a little bit more on podcasting. They haven't really yet, but I've seen some. I'm a big YouTube fan myself, so I've seen some movement in that direction. But I guess they're going to try and really pump that up, that aspect of YouTube up a little bit. They are, and I think that you will see other platforms for podcasts, be it Spotify or Apple, increasingly making video, if not full-on moving faces and lips and whatever, part of podcasts, at least having a slideshow, if you will, while people are listening to podcasts. It's becoming the expectation for sure. And YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world. Wow. The first, of course, number one, is Google. And Google owns YouTube. Yeah. So if you are wanting to have good search results on Google, one thing that you can do that will help is post video on YouTube that has captions or has the transcript in the show notes underneath the video. Because you're doing Google's job there for them in giving them content that has keywords in it. I have a friend who does this with a company that I won't go into what exactly they do, but he puts out videos. He's like, oh, go look at my latest video. And I go on YouTube, and he says, see how many views I've got? And I go, 8. And he says, Yeah, and I don't care because Google has transcribed my video and associated my brand with what I'm talking about there. The keywords are all there, and it helps my search results.
Wow. I wondered about that because I've noticed more and more videos have the transcriptions included below in the show notes.
Yes, I've seen that too.
Yeah, and so that explains why they're doing that. Wow.
Do either of you ever imagine, I'm just thinking out of the box here, but do you guys ever imagine like maybe a TV station or a cable channel ever, playing music videos?
Sure.
Like 24 hours a day?
Absolutely. Yeah, that could happen. You should get like, I don't know, Mark Goodman, Martha Quinn, somebody like that.
Yeah, they would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I think it's going to happen. And
music videos, music.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the next step beyond on demand is always on. And so if I were to use that bandwidth you're talking about for FM for lots of different shows and things, I think I'd have a morning show channel. I'd have this channel. And it would just stream all the time so that nobody has to think, okay, what do I want to do? What do I have in my queue? What have I asked my app to record and play for me when I hit play? Skip that step. Just everything's going to be streamed everywhere. I want to hear the second hour of the morning show. There's a button to hit for that because it's just always there. Yeah.
This has been a great show. I don't normally review the show during the show, but I'm going to review this. Has been a great episode, and as always, it's great having you with us, Dave, to do this. But there was some great stuff in this show, and I suggest that people subscribe, and we'll have more for you.
Well, and the best part is about to happen right now because you said right before we started rolling, that the goal is to get this done and get out of here. And we're about to accomplish that goal.
We're about to accomplish that, but in between that, we got some good information out there, and I hope we entertain people. So that's also the goal.
Like all they always say, it's what's between the beginning and the end that counts.
That's right. Did we say that? Oh, okay. All right. Well, that does it for another edition of Radio Waves. Thanks for joining us. Be sure and subscribe to the channel if this is your first visit to us, and we'll see you next time on Radio Waves.